Good Tuesday afternoon, and thank you for joining us on KARE 11 News Now. I'm Rena Sargentopoulos. Right now, newly passed budget bills sit on Governor Walz's desk. Lawmakers finally came to an agreement on a new budget during a special session that ended early this morning, just hours before the deadline. 15 bills were passed. Governor Walz says he will sign them this week after giving them one more final review. Lawmakers passed all those bills that they didn't get done during the regular session that ended last month. It includes the largest areas of the budget, such as education, human services, and transportation. In total, the next two-year budget is worth $66.8 billion. With the DFL controlling the Senate by one vote and the House tied, this budget was passed in the most closely divided legislature in Minnesota history. In the last few hours, Governor Walz praised Democrats and Republicans for working together to get the job done.
Folks continued to talk, and I've said this, I've been doing this for 20 years, both as a legislator and as the executive. I think this must be the most impressive achievement. The sense of professionalism that went on, the sense of listening to one another that I think was really incredible.
Well, this may not be the only special session of 2025, depending on what happens with the federal budget and Medicaid cuts. Governor Walz says lawmakers may need to return to adjust the state budget later this year. Happening right now, hundreds of U.S. Marines are on the streets of downtown Los Angeles as protests against immigration raids in the city enter a fifth day. This is video of buses carrying the troops from the 29 Palms military base. Federal authorities hoping that the extra boots on the ground will stop violent clashes that tend to pick up overnight. And new video today shows crews coming in to clean up the graffiti that was left overnight. All of this chaos because people want immigration raids to stop in Los Angeles. President Trump just spoke about the federal response to the protests from the Oval Office.
If we didn't get involved, right now, Los Angeles would be burning just like it was burning a number of months ago with all the houses that were lost. Los Angeles right now would be on fire, and we have it in great shape and not playing around. All I want is safety. I just want a safe area. Los Angeles was under siege until we got there. The police were unable to handle it. You can speak to the chief. He said it on television 3 nights ago. He said, this is more than we can handle.
This is not the first time the federal government has gone around state authority to deploy National Guard troops, but it was 60 years ago the last time it happened under very different circumstances. Here's Kent Erdahl.
After days of escalating tensions on the streets of Los Angeles and in our country's halls of power, California's Attorney General officially filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration, writing, "Federalizing the California National Guard is an abuse of the president's authority under the law and not one we take lightly. We're asking a court to put a stop to the unlawful, unprecedented order."
I think that the lawsuit will raise some very interesting points. It's unclear it will go anywhere.
U of M political science professor and Supreme Court expert Tim Johnson says a lawsuit is unlikely to move fast enough to resolve the current conflict on the streets of Los Angeles, but it could eventually clear up questions about the limits of a president's power under something known as Title 10.
What it says is that the president can call out the National Guard if 3 circumstances: the U.S. has been invaded, if there is insurrection, or if protests of any kind would stop the United States from carrying out federal law.
Johnson says that last point is likely what led to the deployment of hundreds of troops in Los Angeles.
That idea of ICE not being able to carry out federal law is all the president believes he needed to call out the troops, and he did so.
How did you find out that the President of the United States was going to usurp your authority and deploy your National Guard here in California?
I got a call from a staffer. No heads up whatsoever.
In an interview with NBC Today, California's governor pushed back on the president's justification, arguing the protests didn't escalate until after the troops were sent in.
Local law enforcement had no needs. They were not requesting any additional resources. He made this up. This is a manufactured crisis in order to get under the tent, to start to stretch credulity, and to begin the process of moving inevitably towards a constitutional questioning crisis around posse comitatus.
The posse comitatus law says that the U.S. military cannot engage in police functions on U.S. soil, that only local or state police officers can do so. The military is not allowed to do that.
The last time a president invoked Title 10 without a governor's approval was in Alabama in 1965. for the Selma to Montgomery March for voting rights.
President Johnson, in that case, sent in the National Guard without Governor Wallace's consent to protect the protesters, not to protect federal agents of any kind. This was to make sure that the march on Selma was going to be conducted without having the protesters be harmed by local law enforcement. So that's the big difference.
In comments today, the president himself made that clear.
People that are causing the problem are professional agitators, they're insurrectionists, they're bad people, they should be in jail.
New this afternoon, Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is dismissing an expert panel of vaccine advisors that historically guide the federal government's vaccine recommendations. Kennedy said the group is, quote, plagued with conflicts of interest. He said the 17-member advisory committee for immunization practices will be retired and replaced with new members. Kennedy does have the authority to appoint and dismiss committee members, but removing the entire panel is unprecedented. The panel members are not political appointees. It is made up of pediatricians, immunologists, epidemiologists, and other physicians. Usually, members serve for 4 years. It's unclear when Kennedy will appoint the new panel members and whether it will impact the rollout of flu and COVID-19 vaccines this fall. Developing right now, Austrian officials say a shooter opened fire inside a school in Graz and killed 9 people today. At least 12 others were hurt in the attack, and the gunman later died by suicide in a school bathroom. NBC's Matt Bodner reports from London.
Good afternoon. We've been hearing a lot from the Austrian authorities today, and in particular a lot about this police response. As far as we understand, police received reports at about 10 a.m. local time of screaming and shooting at a local high school. Police were on site within minutes, including units from the Cobra Special Police Forces, as well as medical personnel. This kicked off a large-scale operation that involved more than 300 police personnel by the time it was over, and according to the Austrian Interior Minister, 9 people were killed before the attack ended. Those were 6 female and 3 male students, plus we're hearing 12 others were injured, some of them quite seriously, and there was a 10th fatality. That would be the shooter himself. We are still learning more about the shooter. At this time, authorities are treating him as a lone gunman. He was a 21-year-old Austrian national, local to Graz, who once attended this particular high school, but he did not finish his studies there. His motives are currently unknown, and he was not previously known to the authorities. One detail that is likely to get a lot of attention in the coming days, the gunman was the legal and licensed owner of the 2 firearms used in this attack, and those weapons were a pistol and a long rifle. Matt Bodner, NBC News, London.
Brand new video in of more Russian strikes on Ukraine. 1 person was killed in the attack, which caused widespread damage in Kyiv. At least 4 others were hospitalized in the attacks that lasted for hours. The southern port of Odessa was also hit by an attack, damaging a maternity ward. The overnight strikes followed Russia's biggest drone assault on Ukraine on Monday. The strikes are part of what Moscow says are retaliatory measures for Kyiv's recent attacks in Russia. Ukraine's Air Force said Russia fired 314 drones across the country, of which 277 were downed. New numbers show home building in the Twin Cities is taking a hit. According to the Keystone Report, 612 permits were issued last month in the metro, which is down 14% compared to the same time last year. A majority of those permits were for single-family houses, with just 22 issued for multifamily builds. The slow pace of home building comes as no surprise with newly enacted steel and aluminum tariffs. And as Gordon Severson explains, the tariffs aren't just impacting home building, but all of those little projects that you may have planned.
When you look at a new home being built, it's easy to see the lumber that it takes. You may not notice the metal, like steel and aluminum.
Your nails, your screws, your HVAC ductwork, a lot of the appliances, your garage door, if you have a steel exterior door, all of that will be impacted.
Nick Erickson with Housing First Minnesota says the new tariffs will likely make new homes more expensive. The National Association of Home Builders says around 7% of the building material in our homes come from overseas. They expect tariffs overall could raise the average cost of a new home by nearly $11,000.
But it's not just the tariffs. We've seen affordability erode over the last 5-6 years.
Erickson says there is a growing gap between what builders can afford to build and what buyers can afford to buy. To basically break even, he says the builders in the Twin Cities have to make homes that cost at least $540,000, whereas most buyers are looking for homes priced at $300,000 or $400,000.
Here in the Twin Cities, it costs far more to build a similar home than it does in Wisconsin or Chicago, and that really does impact Minnesotans' ability to buy a home.
This isn't just a problem for Minnesotans who can afford to build their own home. Erickson says there is a shortage of about 75,000 homes in the Twin Cities, and that has led to higher prices on all homes. And with home building numbers going down, he's worried we may not be able to build our way out of this problem.
State, local, federal government has to start realizing that their policies are having an adverse impact on the cost of housing.
Overall, the National Home Builders Association says the cost of building material has gone up by 34% since 2020, which is a lot higher than overall inflation. But it's not just building material. Experts say higher interest rates, zoning policies, and permitting requirements are also adding extra costs for consumers and construction companies. Stick with us. More news and weather coming up after the break.